Hi, my name is Devan Coggan. I'm a staff writer at Entertainment Weekly, and I am so excited to be here with the cast of Apple TV Plus's Defending Jacob. I am here with the three members of the Barber family, Michelle Dockery, Chris Evans, and Jaeden Martell. Thank you guys so much for being here with me.
Thanks for having us.
I'm so excited to get to talk to you guys about the show because the last time we talked, the show hadn't aired yet, and now the show has aired all of its episodes. We've seen the finale. And it's a very twisty, crazy, sort of way that the Barber stories, the Barber family story ends up. But I wanted to start by, before we get into all the spoilers and before we start talking about the finale, I wanted to start by talking to you guys a little bit about the show overall. It's this story of family and loyalty. And I want to know from each of you, what was your reaction the first time you read the script? What was it that made you say yes? And what was it about this family that made you want to dive into this? I'd love to start with you, Michelle.
Well, I loved the writing and I loved the story. I think I read the first 4 or 5 episodes and was really drawn in instantly. I love this genre and it's something that I hadn't sort of tackled before. So it often comes down to that, the complexity of the character, which Laurie certainly has so much of, and also just the people. I loved Morten and Mark. I felt that they were a brilliant team when I first met them, much as we're doing now on a Skype. And, the quality of the actors who were already attached to it. So it was a number of things that sort of brought it together for me. And it was something that I couldn't resist. And it was such a great experience.
What about you, Jaeden? What was your reaction when you first read the script?
Yeah, it was the same for me. I was definitely attracted to the complexity of the characters. I feel like you don't often get that where the character is sort of not written all on the page. There's a lot of things that you need to figure out for yourself as an actor, and I think that was really appealing just to be able to do some research and get into it and figure out who this character was myself instead of just reading the script. I think I got to prepare, which was a lot of fun and interesting and different than anything I had done before.
And then what about you, Chris? What was it that made you say yes and want to be a part of this?
Yeah, sure. Well, it was like I'll echo their sentiments that initially it was the script. I mean, I only read the first script, but Mark and Morten walked me through what would happen, and I liked the idea of playing a character that had some trauma in his past, in his youth, and like most of us, you build walls and you compartmentalize, you bury things down, and you develop these coping mechanisms without any intention of really ever examining that stuff, and to have all that exhumed in such a public way, I was intrigued by. But really, yeah, Mark and Morten were the deciding factor. At the end of the day, you got to go to work with these people and explore this character and take these risks with it's a collaboration, so they were the ones that kind of I just got along with really well and decided I wanted to work with.
Yeah, and Jaeden, you said something really interesting about how, there's what's on the page, but every character in this, there's so much going on beneath the surface. There's, for whatever words come out of their mouth, there's like hidden meanings and there's secrets and lies. As an actor, how do you find that line between like, okay, here's what's on the page and sort of here's what's going on beneath the surface and I don't know, keeping all those, lies and secrets straight in your head?
That's a good question. I think for me, it was more direct and it was easy to figure out what was a lie and what was truth, just because there's this huge secret that the whole show is based around, is whether Jacob did it or not. So that's what I had to think of, whether he did it or not, and I had to make that decision for myself. So that was more like in your face. But then, yeah, there's a lot of little details and lies, and I think that's the biggest issue with this family, is that there's so much deception, and there's not, obviously they love each other so much, but they also are too scared to tell the truth, and I think that ends up hurting them. So yeah, it's hard to know when exactly these characters are doing more than what they're showing on the page, but I guess it's just about finding a sort of path for your character and sticking to that path. And yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. So we talked a little bit about sort of your first reactions, you know, to the sort of the concept in the beginning of the show, but I want to specifically talk a little bit about the finale, because this is when everything comes to a head and sort of this family falls apart. I mean, what were your initial reactions when you know, sort of learned how this story ends? Because it's similar to the book, but there are some differences, and it's definitely, you know, it's a tragic ending.
Yeah, I mean, I like the fact that it's left without a definitive answer. I think the challenge of tackling the uncertainty is a little more interesting than a couple trying to tackle the challenge of knowing the truth, because then you get to examine the way different people process it. We're dealing with, you know, arbitrary information or relative information, I should say. You know, Andy has developed a lifetime of coping mechanisms and knows how to just turn a blind eye to something that keeps things, you know, that maintains the status quo. He has a belief system that his identity is completely entangled with, and he'll do anything to keep it. Whereas I think Laurie has more, well, I'll let Michelle speak to it, but you know, we have different approaches, and it's predicated on that uncertainty, which I think not only makes it more interesting for us, but hopefully more interesting for the audience.
Mm. Yeah.
Michelle, what was it? What were your reactions to how Laurie's story ends?
Well, I think what's important, and what I'm certainly learning, is that you can't judge your characters that you play, and with something like this, it's, of course, there were parts of me that felt uncomfortable with the way it ended, and her, you know, how it plays out in the end, and how she eventually just cannot cope with not knowing the truth, whether he did it or not. So that ending was very, I felt like those scenes in the car, it was a very sort of carefully crafted scene, and we did it quite a few times, didn't we, Jaeden? It was it was finding a real balance so that it wasn't sort of too on the nose, or sort of too subtle. It had to kind of have that ambiguity. Was this happening just in the moment of her not having much sleep, and it happens, you know, so fast that she doesn't realize what she's doing, or is it premeditated? So it definitely required some careful direction and approach to that scene. But I loved that the ending wasn't so definitive as Chris said. I think it's these days, I think that as an audience, you want to kind of walk away feeling like you have your opinion about it. It's not tied up in a bow neatly. I mean, I think that's what's great about stories that are being told at the moment, is that they're kind of left open.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously mentioned, you know, sort of the emotional linchpin of the finale, and really the whole series is this car crash with Laurie and Jacob. Michelle and Jaeden, walk me through sort of how you wanted to approach that scene. What were your concerns going in? What was it like to shoot such an emotional scene? Like, what was it like on day of?
Well, one of the great things was that it was in the studio, because we weren't actually driving. So it was really contained just on that one set with video screens flying around us. So for an actor, it's great, because you don't have to think about all the other elements, driving, and, you know, you just focus on the scene. So it was a great way of doing it, because it meant that Jaeden and I it could be a very sort of intimate, very quiet environment to play out those moments.
Yeah, it was interesting that car crash was very intimate. It was just the two of us in that car. But thinking back on it, it was definitely one of the hardest scenes that we shot. I feel like, for me, just 'cause it was, like you said, it was hard to find that balance between being like subtle and over the top, and just, obviously it's a hard emotion. It's hard to sort of to tap into your mom wanting to hurt you. It's sort of like you want to be worried about them, but you also you want to fix the situation in any way possible, but you also are scared for your life. And it was just an interesting balance, and definitely a hard scene, but I think it turned out well, and I was definitely happy with the ending. I think it is more interesting, like you guys both said, that you don't know, because this isn't a whodunit. This isn't did Jacob do it. It's about Lori and Andy dealing with the pain of not knowing, and the pain of their son going through all of this. Yeah.
Yeah, Jaeden, I mean, I'm curious on your thoughts on sort of, where Jacob ends up, because in the book, he dies in the crash, and the show leaves it sort of ambiguously open. And like you said, we never, it's not a whodunit. We never learn, his guilt or innocence. What are your thoughts on sort of, that finale for Jacob?
I don't know. It, like what Michelle was saying, it's hard to like not be sort of angry with your characters. And obviously I feel some sort of sadness to know that Jacob is hurt, even though he's obviously made a lot of mistakes throughout the show. And you're always attached to your characters in some way, and you want them to succeed. So it was definitely, it's good to know that he's still alive and they have some kind of future, but it's interesting to think what that future will be and what the conversations will look like after Jacob wakes up. Yeah. So I'm always thinking about it, but I don't know exactly what happens beyond that.
Yeah, there's this ambiguity to it. Absolutely. And Chris, one of the other scenes I specifically wanted to ask you about is, sort of Lori's emotional, breaking point is the car crash. But with Andy, we see that in Mexico, where he's sort of, it's this guy who has spent, his entire life, lying and sort of keeping secrets, finally, spills the beans. And it's this emotional, this real emotional moment. Tell me a little bit about, sort of that scene and how you wanted to approach, sort of Andy's breaking point, basically.
Sure. Yeah. It's just the critical mass, isn't it? It's a guy who's spent his whole life burying things, like I said, and he's really, I think he's completely lost track of where he ends and the world begins. I don't think Andy really knows who he is. I think Andy is the result of a lot of trauma. But I also said earlier, he's very unexplored. I don't think he has any interest in kind of dissecting and examining any of those things and, say therapy or something like that. So this isn't just this circumstance. It's a lifetime of kind of being a very internal, taciturn guy. That's what, it's one of the ribbons they weave through the writing, that Andy doesn't know how to really form relationships. And he's found not what I would call happiness, but balance. He's stable. And to all of a sudden be thrown into this turmoil and have all this exhumed in such a public manner, I think he does his best to hang on with the tools he's honed. But that scene is kind of where it breaks. I think even in the scene, I think it's maybe an episode or two before where I actually turn around and ask Jaeden in the car, "Did you do it?" I think that's the closest he comes, probably the most honest he is in the whole show. Barring when he's drunk. But I think that's the closest he's come to letting himself believe what he's feeling. And that scene, obviously, in Mexico is obviously aided with some booze, but it's the most naked he's been maybe in his whole life.
Yeah, and you mentioned obviously, the trauma of his past, and I wanted to specifically ask about, those scenes with J.K. Simmons as Andy's father. Tell me a little bit about working with him and sort of, because it's such a tense, sort of relationship between, father and son. How did you want to, tell me a little bit about filming those scenes with him? Sure.
Well, it's nice when the truth can lend itself to the performance. I didn't know J.K. very well. I'm not supposed to know my father very well. My father's supposed to be scary. JK can be scary. It's lovely to work with actors who are so talented and so committed and so effortless, because if you do lose your footing, if you kind of can't find north, you can just fall into the other actor and they can bring you right back. And JK, Michelle, Jaeden, everyone on this show was just so talented, so real, so not not going to name names, but I think every actor on this Zoom, whatever this is, would say that sometimes you work with people, and when you're performing with them, it works even if the camera were off. To say that sometimes you work with people and you think it's quite a performance. It'll still work later, but I don't know if the camera's not rolling. I believe this. Everyone on this show was so authentic. If there was no film rolling, you'd be sucked into the truth of it. Thanks to them. So yeah, I got to lean on a lot of good people, JK being one of them.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to ask about is, the three of you have such a, believability as sort of the Barber family, and how did you guys, kind of want to approach, was it easy? Did you guys immediately were like, we're a family unit, we got this, or did it take a little bit of time to sort of figure out like sort of your dynamic? What was it like to sort of form that Barber family dynamic?
I mean, from the start, it felt. Sorry, go on, Chris.
No, yeah. I mean, I think we're going to say the same thing.
Yeah, it felt from the start like everybody kept saying to us, "God, you're like a family." Like an instant, we had this sort of bonding that happened quite, early, and I think that comes from, that we all got on and we all share a very sort of similar humour, and but when you're approaching something like this, it's so delicate. So we were also aware of that and sensitive to each other's characters and, the sometimes the challenges that each of us had to come up against in different scenes. But we also spent a lot of time in that house, which was beautifully designed, that I felt like I wanted to, take the design and make it my own kitchen at home. But we were in there for like 6 weeks, I think, towards the end. So the majority of the locations and more kind of trickier areas to shoot was sort of done early. So we'd all kind of got our footing. And so by the time we got in the house, we were all just, very close. And it felt like a house. It felt very, it was a very sort of intimate space, and it was ours. And so I think that did have a lot to do with it. And we had some lovely social times together. And, after, it's very important on a show like this that you get some, times away where it's, you get a little bit of respite and some fun. So it was great, and across the crew as well. I mean, it was just such a lovely set to be on.
Yeah, I got to give Jaeden some credit too, because I mean, it's a family dynamic, but it very easily could have been 2 adults and a kid. You know what I mean? Offset, that could have been the vibe. This was 3 adults. You know what I mean? You really got to give Jaeden credit for his maturity, and had he not been such a seasoned actor and an advanced thinker, I think it would have been a different dynamic. Not to say it wouldn't have been accomplishable, but he just brought a certain level of professionalism and maturity with it that just lent it to a certain sense of comfort that when we were together, I didn't feel like, you had to put on kid gloves or something. I feel like he's older than I am.
But it is true. I did feel like we were a family very early on, and that's also because of Mark and Morten and the whole crew and everybody working on it, and just it became a fun and easy environment to be in, even though we were shooting super emotional and draining scenes.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, obviously, working with Mark and Morten as the creators of the show, what was it for you guys that they brought to the table? What was it like to, have them, be in charge?
I mean, amazing. They're fish rots from the head down. So if this thing doesn't work, just keep looking up and you'll find out why. And they were just so good. They set the tone every day. And I mean, we've said this in a few interviews already, that I never once felt that there was nothing that Michelle, Jaeden, and I, or any of the other actors couldn't say that Morten and Mark wouldn't take with the absolute utmost respect. And, they'll stop shooting. We'll stop if we have to stop. If an actor isn't feeling right, we're going to take a break. We're going to go talk about it. And you really felt prioritized. And it's a really, really lovely feeling, because it just doesn't always go that way. And it just made every day a really, really enjoyable place to take risks and explore. Because as Michelle said, the detail is what makes this work. It's so easy to kind of just tip the scales in the wrong direction. So it's a lot of finesse work, and that takes time, patience, and and very understanding directors and writers.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it was a very collaborative environment as well. You know, if there was ever a moment where you felt that you wanted to kind of have Morten or Mark's take on a previous scene and how it flows into the next scene, you know, you had such an incredible, talented group of people around you to sort of help guide it at times, because when you're shooting all out of sequence, sometimes it is great to have, you know, a group of people that you can lean on a little. But they're just, I mean, Morten he has such an incredible energy on set, and he's so encouraging. So like when you get a take that he really feels is the one or really good, you hear him at the monitor go, yes!
Yeah, you live for that. You live for that.
so good. And it's, you know, it's lovely to have that encouragement and that energy on set. It's wonderful. But, you know, and as Chris said, having that, it's a luxury when you're working with people who do really give you that time to really sort of pick through the scene and make it the best it can possibly be.
Yeah, having that immediate feedback, I would imagine, would be a lot of fun. You know, that literal verbal feedback as soon as you finish the take.
It's funny.
And Michelle, you mentioned something earlier about, you know, the family dynamic and, you know, the importance of being able to sort of, you know, decompress after a day of shooting, because this is such a, you know, I would imagine this is such a heavy headspace to be, you know, working in and day out. Did you guys find, you know, at the end of the day when you wrapped shooting, was this something, were you able to sort of like easily put it on a shelf and go back to your normal life, or was this something that sort of like kind of stuck with you a little bit?
For me, it's really important to leave it on set.
For sure.
And just try and, you know, do something, you know, go and cook and go for a dinner or a cocktail, and just kind of leave it there especially when it's something emotional. But you know, for me personally, I really needed my rest in the week, and because it was, you know, such an emotional role. But at weekends, it was important, I think, for all of us to have, you know, to meet up and all get together, and that rapport with crew is really, I find that really important. And I'm someone, and both Chris and Jaeden are the same. We really encourage that as actors, to get everybody together and have a good time. And I think it really comes out in the work. It just kind of creates a really good energy, and especially sort of midway through the shoot when everyone's feeling tired. And we went bowling, and, you know, we did all sorts of fun things to keep us going. But I'm certainly someone who has to leave it at the door. So I did my best to do that with Laurie.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, you know, for each of you guys, you know, now that the show is out and we can kind of talk about it as a whole, I'd love to know from each of you, you know, when you look back on the entire series, was there a particular day on set or a scene that you shot that is just, you know, just sticks in your memory, whether it was a challenge or just a particularly day? Like when you look back on this whole experience, was there like one moment or one scene that really, you know, really sticks out in your mind? I'd love to start with you, Jaeden. Is there a particular scene that comes to mind for you?
It's hard to think of that because almost every scene was difficult in some way. I think I feel like the one scene that we shot with Cherry in her office, and it's 10 pages of dialogue, and just us going back and forth, and me talking, or Jacob talking about his experience finding Ben's body. I think that was really, it was really fun because it was just playing ping pong with Cherry Jones, and it had like the right amount of emotion in it, and also just, it was a lot of dialogue, obviously, so it was difficult in the technical way, but it was a lot of fun and very satisfying to see. But there was also a lot of scenes where there wasn't a lot of dialogue, and it was very simple, and just the scenes with us three in the house, and when Michelle had a lot of emotional impact, and sometimes Jacob would be out of the loop or something. I feel like those were also very difficult because those are the scenes where you sort of feel disappointed in your character and you kind of want to smack him. And so I think there was a lot of scenes where I felt separate from him, and I wanted to, obviously you want to be as close to your character as possible. So those were hard to shoot too. But yeah, there's so many good scenes in this show.
Yeah, Jacob spends a lot of time like silent, just like having looks and having things, underneath the surface. I would imagine that would be kind of a challenge to play, but also kind of fun to, deal with that interior self.
Yeah, it's definitely very internal for this character, and I just had to figure out who he was really, and like what you were saying before with leaving it all behind. I think leaving it all behind is easy, but I think the difficult part is before shooting, and I think oftentimes I would be very hard, sort of just miserable all day and hard to deal with, and I'd be, it would suck for my mom to have to be at home with me, but it was just, I just had to be in a sort of negative headspace sometimes to play this character.
Absolutely. Chris, what about you? When you look back on the series as a whole, is there a particular scene or a day on set that really sticks out in your mind?
Oh yeah, I was going to say the courtroom stuff was tough for us three specifically because we didn't have anything to do. I remember a whole week of shooting in that courtroom where it's unbelievable work that's happening. Cherry and Pablo, and there's this beautiful, important stuff for the story. But for the most part, barring the few tight shots of reactions and intimate moments, but you want dialogue, you want some meat, you want to get out there and throw some punches. So it was a real test of patience and self-control during that week was tough. I remember just going a little crazy because it was all boarded out. So you have just I don't even know how many days it was. It felt like at least 6 or 7 shooting days of just sitting, which again, you can still invest in the role and watch what you're supposed to be watching, but it's still, as an actor, you want to talk.
Mm-hmm. You want to be in the middle of everything. That's fair. What about you, Michelle? When you look back on the shoot as a whole, what was the scene or day on set that really sticks out in your mind?
I agree that the courtroom scenes were, at times they dragged. You had to really, concentrate to keep your concentration. And sometimes those moments are because there aren't any words. Everything has to sort of portray on your expression. And in those moments, of course, they have been told you're not to show any emotion. So that restraint was sometimes could be a challenge to play. Like Jaeden said, there's so many scenes that stand out to me and ones that I felt so proud of watching them back. So many of our scenes as a family. But one that really stands out for me is the grocery store scene.
Oh yeah,
with Joan Rifkin with Megan, because it was a scene without any dialogue, and it for me it was I've been playing Laurie so distraught and upset, and I've kind of gotten used to that. And then there's this moment where a song plays and she kind of has a happy moment and starts putting groceries for 4th of July and flags and all the stuff. And it really threw me. I really did struggle with that day, and just felt silly. I just felt, there's moments as an actor when you feel so vulnerable and so exposed, and
such a good scene.
I think it turned out fine, but I was so worried about it. And then also I think it was because I knew that I was going to get spat on. So I think that was what was brewing. It's just like, so I was going to spit in my face, which actually that turned out, it was such a
loved it. It was really strange.
So I knew I had my punishment coming. But the two, there's such a poignant moment between the two women, the two mothers, and I loved that scene and how it played out. And Megan was I just think extraordinary as Joan Rifkin. And but yeah, so that's one that really stands out for me. I'll never forget a bit of water from a can being sprayed in my face.
Is that what it was? Someone just sitting there spraying you? Is that what that was?
Tara. Yeah, my lovely makeup artist. Just Tara. Movie magic. Yeah.
Not your normal day on set. It's not every day. Yeah.
Not every day. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Chris, one of the scenes I wanted to ask you about is, you mentioned obviously, Jacob's courtroom scenes, but there's also those great scenes where with you in the grand jury trial, and we, they're sort of bleak and they're sort of somber, but there's also like those moments where you can see like, oh, this is like sort of the star like lawyer that Andy was. He's a little cocky. He like cracks a joke. He knows how to play to the audience. Tell me a little bit about filming those. I feel like those would be kind of fun to play.
Sure. Well, it's always fun when you can play with the timeline and kind of withhold some of the plot to the audience, just dangling this carrot in front of them that enough has happened to warrant this change, this shift in behavior and demeanor and tone. So, you get the fun of kind of teasing a little bit. But again, he's supposed to be the most, calloused, ossified version of himself. So it's a very internal thing from a guy who's already pretty internal. And the goal of those moments, in my opinion, at least in the early episodes, is to get the audience to lean in. You know what I mean? If during those moments they want to know more, those scenes are effective. If during those moments they turn off a little bit because it was the volume was too low, you missed the mark. So it's kind of a balancing act of making sure that you can see a guy who's a shell of himself and doesn't have much left to give, but it should elicit interest.
Absolutely. And so in a minute, we've got a lot of audience questions. We're going to throw to those in a minute. But before we do that, I want to ask each of you, this is a mini-series, it's a story that's concluded. But if there were to be a season 2, or even if just your personal imagination, what do you think the future holds for the Barber family? Do you think they can ever, kind of rebuild a sense of normalcy after this?
I love the family so much that I feel I would hope that they would recover and they begin to rebuild. But I just don't know how it would play out now, and especially between Jacob and Laurie, and how their relationship is could potentially be damaged by what she did. Who knows?
Yeah, I would certainly be intrigued by, I think Andy is the living embodiment of what happens when you are not honest and how that can kind of permeate and spread. And then you'd eventually have a man who's spent his whole life compartmentalizing, and now an entire family who probably, in order to survive, would have to do the same thing. And you have 3 shells of themselves, everyone kind of choosing to turn a blind eye to certain aspects of the truth in order to maintain this belief system. And then everyone's just playing house, which I think is tragic and probably pretty ubiquitous, which is awful to think about.
What about you, Jaeden? What do you, what do you think the future holds for Jacob?
That depends on whether or not he did it. Maybe he'll go off murdering some more people, or
find his tactics. You're never going to catch him again.
We'll never know. So I don't know. There's 2 versions to that story. I don't know, but I hopefully they can finally. It could end up like what Chris was saying, 3 shells in a house, but hopefully they can learn how to talk to each other and tell the truth and have a conversation. I don't know, but that'll be difficult if it ever comes to that.
Yeah, that's something Mark Bomback said, was that it's an extremely bleak ending, but there's also sort of a little bit of optimism and a little bit of hope, and that maybe these people can learn and start to rebuild. But it's not a straight tragedy, but it's also there's definitely some darkness in there, and that ambiguity is interesting.
Yeah.
So we have a couple fan questions that were submitted to us via Twitter. To start, we've got for Chris and Jaeden, this being the third time working together, was there something different about playing a father-son relationship that differed from Knives Out and playing it cool?
Oh my God, playing it cool. Well, yeah, I mean, our relationship and playing, I mean, we don't have a relationship playing it cool. We're pretty in Knives Out, we didn't have much interaction in Knives Out. I think you and I just both play pretty deplorable characters, as is everybody in that movie. But yeah, our actual screen time was pretty minimal. So this certainly is in a class on its own.
Mm-hmm. But it did definitely help being on Knives Out, and obviously a father and son or a parent and son relationship is as close as you get. So if you get some time to spend with your parent or your son beforehand, it's nice. And
very true.
Got to talk on set and talk about the show, which was
it was nice. The first time I saw him on set, I was like, "Hey, I think you're going to play my son." Like it was right around the time that we had both jumped on board to the project, so that was fun to look forward to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a family meeting of sorts, just different kinds of families. This is another fan question. This is for everyone. We talked about this a little bit, but was there a scene that you guys really felt that pushed your boundaries as an actor, or something that you had never done before?
I did a lot of running.
You should. I was going to say I had to swim a little bit. I've never done that. That was kind of.
I mean, emotionally, there was a lot of. It was for me. It was the consistency of the emotional. There was so many scenes, where Laurie is, crying about to. It was maintaining that kind of focus was the sort of challenge, the overall challenge for me. And running in 90 degrees heat one of the days.
I think while you weren't even feeling well too, right? Weren't you sick one of those days that you had?
I was really sick one of the days. Yeah. We actually had a stunt double because it was so hot. We had to keep switching out. I think even crew had to kind of keep switching out that day because the weather was so humid. Yeah.
I'd say maybe, just the character in general. I'm an open book. I'm a very chatty guy, and I don't play my cards close to the vest ever. So just playing a guy who's very internal, like Jaeden said. Sometimes you said it perfectly, almost disappointed in your character. You're just kind of like, oh man, just say it. She loves you, say it. So a lot of times, like I said, just dissecting the thought process of someone who's very different than myself.
Same for me. I think Jacob is. I think what Morten and Mark really wanted to do is to make him normal, and so it was playing normal. I think is hard. I think it's hi Dodger.
All right, sit down.
Playing someone normal is almost harder than playing someone outwardly psychotic or a murderer or whatever. I just like the scenes with Chris and telling the joke and telling jokes and being casual and eating. I think those are some of the hardest. And
those are tough, man. Those are really tough.
It's really funny, but so I think that definitely pushed my boundaries in a way, and just appearing like a normal human. I think that's underratedly hard for an actor, is to be normal.
Well said.
Well said.
Up next, we have for Chris. What did you find was the hardest or easiest part about playing a father? And was there anything you found that you incorporated or used from your personal experiences to help with this role?
Oh yeah, I love doing it. Obviously, I don't have kids, so trying to fully understand the depth of that love. But I have a lot of things in my life that I love pretty deeply. So I had a great relationship with my father. I have a great relationship with my father. So it was nice to kind of spend time reflecting on that, not just the nature of the relationship, but just his posture, his cadence, the way, even just, poking your head in the door at night to say goodnight, the physicality of it. Just there's something about when my dad was in the room as a kid, you had a feeling of being safe or something. You know what I mean? You're just like, well, both my parents, when mom and dad are here, we're okay. And that's a really lovely role to fill.
Absolutely. What about you, Michelle? Was there anything that you for playing a mother, was there anything that you sort of tapped into?
Well, I have a very close relationship with my mom, and I certainly took some of her nature, I guess, in Laurie. It was important for me that Laurie was very tactile, and we all sort of felt that way from the beginning, that they're a very close family, so that as things begin to be, as they're torn apart and become much more isolated, it was important to sort of establish that quite early on. She's a mum who likes to cuddle her son, and she's very affectionate. And my sister has children, so I'm very close with my family. So there were certainly traits that I've picked up from my mum and my sister that I've sort of applied. Certainly, yeah.
Absolutely. One of our next questions is for Jaeden. Is there something in Jacob's character that you personally can identify with?
I think beneath all of the, no, I don't want to say that. I think he loves his family very much, even if he does lie, or even if he isn't lying, or whatever. Just throughout this, sometimes you get the sense that he is just angry at the situation, but not that far deep down. He really loves his family, which I do very much, and he values them, and he feels safe around them, because he does feel, because he loses that safety with his mom. So for me, I feel very, I love my mom, and I love my family. So so I relate to him on that.
That makes it easier. Another question was, what was the most difficult scene to film with all three of you?
I kind of agree with Jaeden. Some of those singing Feliz Navidad. Oh, so awkward. So awkward. No, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, the specifically with this group, the more challenging the scene, the more enjoyable it was. It was a really fun sandbox to get into. I never found that the heavy stuff that the three of us had to do, which there's plenty of, was ever the real challenge. It was like Jaeden said, the simple stuff, the silly stuff. That's when it was like, oh God, should we be screaming at each other? This is this is really tough.
Wait, we're not crying. This is weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like when you two go fishing, and it's like, it's sort of out of place. It's like, wait, we've seen them do so much screaming and brooding, that it's like, oh, there's like a normal father son moment.
Sure.
We still had a little emotional anchor to.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit of weight to it. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, great. Well, hey, thank you guys again. This has been such a great conversation. Thanks you guys so much for doing this.
You got it.
All right, great. I'm Devan Coggan, and Defending Jacob is now streaming on Apple TV+.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
I'm here with the show's writer, Mark Bomback, and the director, Morten Tyldum. Thank you guys so much for being here and chatting with me.
Our pleasure.
Our pleasure.
I'm so excited to get into the show with you. We want to talk a little bit about the show overall, and definitely get into some spoiler territory and talk a little bit about the finale. But before we do that, I want to start with talk about the show overall. And so I want to start with you, Morten. What was it about this story of family and trust that really intrigued you and made you want to make this show?
I'm always like the character-driven sort of like thriller genre movies where you have where you take somebody you can really relate to and you throw them on, as deepest water as you can. I think exploring sort of like, what would you have done? What's the like, exploring characters which you can relate to, make hard choices is something which is very appealing. And the script, which Mark sent me the first episode, which was beautifully written. And my son now is 12. It was very relatable to what the parents go through and sort of like their nightmare. So and I like the suspense of it. I actually fell in love with the project really quickly, and me and Mark also really had the same reference of what kind of movie, as at a few minutes we thought this reminds us about Mystic River, which is a movie we both love, and so it was very easy to say yes to this.
Yeah, and Mark, when you were first writing the script, I know you said that you had originally imagined, adapting William Landay's novel as a film script. What was it about this story that made you say, actually, no, I think TV is I want to tell this as a miniseries and over these episodes?
Well, it had been sent to me with the notion that I would adapt it as a film script because that's most of the writing I'd done. But within the first couple of chapters of reading the book, I realized this isn't the kind of story we really make for the multiplexes anymore. It's become the purview of high-end television. So as I continued reading, my thought was really more about, is this about enough? Can it sustain 8 hours of audience interest and truthfully of my own interest? It's something that I'm going to have to live with for a long time while writing it. And what I was really drawn to, along the lines of what Morten said, it manages to do two things at once. It manages to be sort of a nail biter, did he or didn't he, and at the same time really be an exploration of what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a parent, what it means to be a child. And I get really excited about ideas that are capable of participating within a genre and also somehow trying to transcend the limitations of the genre. And this seemed like just that opportunity. And the TV I've really fallen in love with are whether it's Broadchurch or even stuff like Mad Men. They're able to sort of be focused on these questions of how we tick, and in a way that movies can do. But I think it's a struggle to get a studio to greenlight something that is going to be so focused on the characters, unless it's not genre, and so again, things are sort of aligned that I'd rather think about it as television, and it lent itself to that better.
That makes a lot of sense. And for each of you, once you started diving into the story and figuring out how you were going to tell it, in this medium, how did you want to walk that line between, adapt when you've got source material, you've got William Landay's novel. How did you want to walk that line between, staying true to his story, but also, updating it for television, putting your own mark on it, figuring out how you would tell this story in 2020?
Well, I can answer it first, and Morten can chip in. The book is written in the first person, and it was, as you said, it was written over 10 years ago. And immediately, one of the first things that occurred to me is if you start thinking about this as not just Andy's story, but Laurie's story and Jacob's story, you all of a sudden have a lot more scenes to think about and a lot more points of view. And that, to me, automatically started to make it feel more cinematic and less subjective in a novelistic way. And one of the first big changes that occurred to me was in the character of Jacob. In the book, you're seeing him through Andy's eyes, and so he's written much darker because it's about a father trying to grapple with whether or not his perception of his son is accurate. Whereas when you literalize something, when you film it, it's much less forgiving in terms of that subjectivity. And so one of the first things, and then also just simply in terms of relatability for an audience, I thought if we made Jacob more quote unquote normal, that was a way to really make the story sort of more expansive. And right then, that was sort of the starting point. And then a lot of decisions that strayed from the novel stem from those two things: broadening out the points of view, and then how we approach Jacob.
So up next, I wanted to talk a little bit about. So I wanted to ask Morten, what for you? What was it that you wanted to keep in mind as you were adapting, sort of the story from this book, and what did you want to keep in mind about, how it would, how you wanted to craft it for television?
I mean, when you do a movie or a series based on a book, you have to sort of like take the story and sort of retell it. You have to be sort of like the spiritual twin or cousin to the book. There's no way you can, and it shouldn't be. I mean, a film or a TV series based on a book shouldn't be exactly like it. It's a new medium. It's a new way of telling it. Where there's new storytellers coming on and retelling the story. There will be things which, for me and Mark, is more important than it was for the original author that we would emphasize in the script. So there'll be all these things. And also then you come in with, you cast actors who will portray these characters, and they will bring, their values, their interpretation, everything to the character and change it. So and I think that's kind of the interesting part, that it is a new medium. It's the intentions, the core, you can represent sort of like the feel of a book, but it is a new medium. The story should be a little bit different. There's a lot of choices which Mark first did in the writing, and that also we wanted to do when we started to film it. Like, one of them is point of view. This is a story that's not just told to one character, like Andy's character, is told also to Laurie, him, and also sometimes to other characters, where we the use of point of view in the series has been very specific. This isn't a thriller. Like, it's sort of like when we're in a fly on the wall, it's kind of like a God point of view looking down on them, or are we really following these two parents who are, in their private battle and nightmare. So there's all these changes which we've done, and also we decided to make them younger than they were in the book. Felt that was relevant. There were so many other things that we did, but at the same time, there was so much in the book that we really wanted to protect. We wanted it to happen at the same locations, the same places. We wanted to be true to sort of like what the character went through, how they, so. I mean, there's always an interesting part. What do you change? What do you not change?
Absolutely. So you mentioned obviously casting this. So I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about, casting sort of the three key members of the Barber family. What was it about, Chris, Michelle, and Jaeden that made them the right people to, portray this family?
Okay. First of all, we Mark and I had we had a meeting with Chris, and we were both struck like how thoughtful, how much he understood and cared for this character already early on. This was something he wanted to play, and it was kind of a little, but he's not a parent himself, or whatever. But there was so much that triggered him, whether his own childhood, his own relationship to his dad. And he had, his perspective of the character was something that we could really agree on and relate to. And also, he is something that could bring both, a lot of strength to the character, but also a lot of vulnerability, which is kind of like the core of it. This is someone who is very capable and would do anything for his son. But at the same time, he is so lost and has all this, it's bring this very incredible vulnerability and fragility to it. So he's cracking up. His whole image, the whole character he's built up on, is sort of like crumbling. So and Chris was able to do that in such a brilliant way. So we felt we sort of like got the perfect Andy Barber. We couldn't be more pleased with him. So yeah, I don't know if you want to take.
Yeah, and similarly with Michelle, it's interesting. Neither one of them have children. They're both old enough to have a child Jaeden's age, but they would have had to have him quite young. And as Morten mentioned earlier, we wanted to lean into this idea that they were on the young side, and first off, it suggests that maybe they had him a little young and they weren't sort of as prepared as they might have been for parenthood. And there's something about them. Look, they're both very attractive people and the kind of people that I think a community would admire from afar. And I think those same kind of people are people that we secretly hope fail sometimes in our worst sides of ourselves. And I think there was something about, I mean, Michelle has such just a built-in warmth to her that you will immediately believe she's someone that other people are drawn to. And she is this sort of this mother figure for her friends as well as her family. And there's sometimes a false sense of security in being that kind of person, that when things fall out from underneath you, you've taken for granted a bit your position in the world. And I think Michelle was really gifted at embodying that. There's a version of that character that you would begrudge a bit. And then she never sort of instills that emotion in us. Instead, she actually makes us root for her. And really what's most critical of both these actors is that you want to really be in their shoes as the show unfolds, and you really want to see the world through their eyes as much as possible, and that involves relating to them a lot. And I think they're both people who come off as approachable but also admirable. And then Jaeden, of course, we'd be remiss without discussing Jaeden, because he's really more. Chris and Michelle would say it all the time. We'd say it too. He was just this invaluable member of our cast. Morten, you could talk about Jaeden.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because Jaeden, even if he's done so much, he was the lead of It. He did Midnight Special. He's St. Vincent. He's had all these movies, but we didn't recognize him immediately because he actually auditioned for it in the first round. And we thought that finding Jacob is going to be a nightmare. It's going to be, finding a kid who can have that mystery, be that enigmatic, because that's what you have to do. You have to constantly guess what his motives, what his feelings are, which is really, really hard to do as an actor. We saw this audition tape, first round of actors, and it was like, this is uncanny good for an audition tape. It's like it was so perfect. Just up, you would just first read. So he was one of the first we actually locked down. It's like, we need to get him. It means something because it is so hard. And as we said before, Mark and I had a talk with Jaeden, and we said that you have to make a decision if he did it or not, but you don't tell anybody. Nobody knows, only you. So, and that's why when you play your character, you have to decide for yourself, are you lying here or are you telling the truth? And it's kind of weird to direct somebody. I don't know what he was thinking. Mark doesn't know. And you sort of like directing him, and only he knows what the character did. And it said it helped him a lot to use that, and it was kind of a very interesting approach to a character that this film. He told his mom, he said, but beside those two, nobody knows what he actually played.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to ask you guys about, because I know something you guys have talked about is how it is a murder mystery, but it's really not. In the end, we don't ultimately learn whether or not Jacob did it. Why was it important to you to sort of leave that ambiguity and never answer that for the audience?
I mean, in a sense, that's what the entire show is ultimately about, is this notion of to what extent can we live with awful things that our loved ones might have or might not have done. And really, at the end of the day, we're at the mercy of that doubt that Andy and Laurie are at. And it's a binary thing, right? Either he did it or he didn't do it. Over the course of these 8 hours, you certainly entertained both of those ideas as an audience member. And I think, for lack of a better word, the twist here is that you actually wind up exactly where Andy and Laurie is. But you have a gut feeling, and at one point, and I guess we're in spoiler zone, at one point Laurie even says, just tell me the truth. Did you do it? And he finally says, yes, I did it. But you realize he's saying it just to get her to slow down. And right then, when she says, I'll never know, that's the truth. You'll never know. Even if he says I did it, you're going to not be sure. And if he says I didn't do it, you're never sure. And I think it's that abyss that the show is really interested in looking into. And it's in some ways more torturous for the parents than a definitive answer.
It's kind of like what this is actually is about is like the unconditional love, which you have to. So you have the unconditional love, and then will that stand against like your moral compass, your sense of what's right or wrong? What if these things collide? Who will win? And that's kind of like what this is about. What are you willing to accept from the people you love? What are you willing to not talk about? We also talked about it as like which is very Ibsen. It's like the life lie, the lie you have that you decide to live with, but it's something that you need and you not talk about. This is the things which we will accept in our life. This is the lie that I will walk through life because I need this lie to be able to function. And it's like, and those are kind of like the bigger, more complex themes. And it's so fun to sort of like bake that into sort of like a whodunit and kind of like spring this on people. Like say, no, this is not. If it did or not, it's not as interesting to see, like to explore the fact that these characters are willing to try and get their life together and move on, knowing that these are things we can never talk about. We have to just live with these, all these dark deeds and this uncertainty and find a way through it. That is interesting to explore. We want people to, after the show is gone, turn to their, partner or their friends or their partner, whatever, and discuss what would they have done? Was that the right choice? Was that the wrong choice? Like, no, I would never accept that. I would have left you or whatever, but it sparks a conversation.
Yeah, I love the idea of married couples who have children of their own. After watching it, getting into a sort of a proxy discussion along the lines of what Andy and Laurie have been dealing with the whole show, which is like, do I think he did it or do I not? And to what extent can we ever be sure? We're never going to be sure. I think in some ways it is, not to get hoity-toity, but it's a bit of a metaphor for what it means to be a parent. Is there's always going to be, and what it means to be a spouse. There's going to be boundaries to what you could ever truly know about the people you love, and how much you're willing to just take on faith they're the people you want them to be, or as Morten said, how much of a foundation of a lie are you willing to build for yourself to move forward, as a family.
Yeah, and like you guys said, it sort of comes to this. It sort of culminates with the Laurie and Jacob in the car. That scene where she finally confronts him and says, did you do it? And he says what he thinks she wants to hear. Tell me a little bit about everything that went into that car scene, because that really is sort of the emotional linchpin of the finale and really the entire series.
It is. I mean, we knew this is going to be was a difficult scene to shoot, and it's a pivotal and very important scene. I mean, we one of the first things we talked about before we start shooting, how do we do the crash? And actually shooting it's shot in so many parts, which is hard because you shoot the actors on stage in a car on a gimbal, who's doing that with machines and rain cannon that blows, and then you have these big screens outside that where you project the passing houses and trees. So first we have to you have to put all these pieces together, and it's not an easy place to perform because it's so technical. Like everything you're doing, very technical setups, it's harder for the actor. You have to sort of like, there's more you have to tune out. The more you can put an actor into like the environment where they're supposed to be performing, more easy for them to immerse themselves and to sort of like forget there's a crew and technical thing. But so it was hard, and we were trying a lot of different things with the actors shooting it, like how catatonic, how much in her own world should Laurie be, how much would she recognize what was going on with Jacob, how much is Jacob recognize with her, how much panic is it. So we tried a lot of different things, and we sort of like cracked the scene with Michelle when she, in one of the takes, she started to repeat sentences more, like almost like the became it matter. She sort of like, you felt she was lost it. She started repeating, I would never know, I would never know, I would never know. She just started to do that, and you really felt she was falling apart. So we said, oh, me and Mark, like that, there we got it. This is sort of like the key for that final moment, because we didn't want people to feel like she went on this ride because she wanted to crash the car. It was not premeditated. This is something that happened in the moment. She had a sleepless night. This is consuming her, and she needs to know. So we shot the performances was the first thing we did, so we could like tailor everything around that. And then we go on. We had to shoot the cars, the exteriors. We had to go somewhere to find a tunnel, which was really hard because in the area, Boston area, there is no tunnels. So we could find that out a little too late. So you have to go somewhere else to find a tunnel so we could shoot that, and then cars. Then you piece it all together. And then, of course, you shoot the Chris part separate of him trying to reach them and what he goes through. So it's one of those scenes that's big, but you never really know if it really worked until it all comes together.
What's interesting is that, I've had friends or even just people I've met who read the book and will say, oh my God, that crash scene, I remembered it from the book. It was even scarier in the show. And it gives me a bit of a chuckle because it's barely in the book. Andy's not present in that scene. So it's just mentioned in like a page. And you never get any dialogue for it. You're never inside the car with them. And I remember when reading the book the first time, that was one of the things I was excited about is, I get to actually write this scene. It's really where the book ends is Andy's telling you that this car crash happened, and that's the end of the book. And to me, it's a testament to Bill's writing, the author of the book, that people felt some kind of visceral response to the book, to that ending, even though you're not in the car. But also a nice compliment to the show that it was in the spirit of clearly what you read, but was much more intense because, again, we're doing something that's a visual medium and able to really bring you inside of that moment. And it was challenging. I remember Morten and I having conversations about that scene in some Marriott in Boston somewhere, just trying to kick the tires on and making sure we'd explored every angle of it, because so much rests on you really being with Laurie in that moment and fully understanding how she's reached this place, which seems inconceivable when you've begun the show,
Yeah, and you mentioned obviously sort of making changes from the differences from the book. One of the biggest changes is that in the book Jacob dies, and here the series ends with him unconscious but alive. Walk me through a little bit about how you made that decision.
Sorry, go ahead, man. No, do you think?
Okay, well, I just want to say one thing, which is a lot of people have, which we read afterwards. They say like, oh, they did this because they want a second season. Which is like, they know that was not the reason. The reason is because if in the book they both die, and then there's no choice. Because what we want to do, we want to explore the choice that you decide to go move on. That you're willing. What are you willing to live with? And if they both die, there's no choice. Everything stops. It's more like, does he want revenge or not, or whatever? It's like it's not that interesting. So it was purely from a character point of view that we wanted them to move on, because we wanted to feel like Andy is aware that his wife tried to kill his son, that he's willing to emphasize sort of like a lie that they both live it, because he wants more than to punish anybody. He wants to get his family back. He wants to try and move on, and that's so much more interesting to explore than a tragic ending where everybody dies.
And toward that end, like again, in making it more of Laurie's story as well as Andy's story, this entire trajectory has been about Andy living with these little lies and obscuring things from his family for really the entirety of their existence. And finally, as the story is concluding, he goes to this place where for the first time ever, he divulges this massive truth that he knows can destroy everything, but does the ethical thing. Even though he's a bit drunk when he does it, he still does the thing that he knows is potentially destructive to everything. And for the first time ever, goes all in on the truth. And Laurie, who the whole time has been this detective and really trying to get to the truth, even if it destroys them in a sort of dark way, what we're looking at is each of their ability to live with lies. So that in that moment Morten mentioned, when Andy, in the aftermath of this crash, says to Laurie, it was an accident, we can see in her face, she's always, now she doesn't remember the exact moment of the impact, but she certainly remembers everything days leading up to that. And she knows she was capable of it. And we see her doing the thing that Andy's been doing the entire story, which I'm going to live with this lie myself in the interest of just moving forward. And it's putting them both to the test. And I think there's some kind of tragic irony to the way that she comes over to his way of living. And I don't think that journey works as well if they've lost Jacob. Then it's for what? And I think there's something interesting in the way we leave them, that they've constructed this prison for themselves. And part of the reason it's so scary is that he is alive and he will come back. In the aftermath of this, he will very well do the thing that Laurie's worried about, which is say, what if my mother tried to kill me? And in fact, he will have the same suspicions of his parents that they've been living with about him for the last, 8 hours of storytelling. So it felt like a much richer ending. And it's not to rob the book of its success. It's just the book had a different agenda than we do.
Yeah, and like you said, it has this sort of beautiful and very kind of ugly symmetry to it, where you have, the parents questioning their child, and it ends with, when the child wakes up, he's going to be questioning his parents. And there's something sort of very uncomfortable about that.
That was the goal.
Yeah. I'm curious.
So I also saw on Twitter, somebody took the 2 first shots of Jacob and Andy, and the 2 last shots of Andy sitting in his bed. And somebody found out, we shot it, it's like the first episode and the last episode, and so we did matching shots. It's like he's coming in to wake him up, plays AC/DC, and he sits down on the side of the bed and plays that. This is the first interaction between these two, and it's close up. And then you have the last moment is the empty bed and the dark room, and he sits down in the same place, but now with a whiskey. And so it's also a nice way to bookend this character journey, like this tragedy that actually happened to them. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm curious, how would it's kind of hard to classify the ending, right? Because it is a tragedy, but there's also something sort of bleakly optimistic in the idea of these people sort of choosing to go forward and try to rebuild their lives. How would you guys, just think about sort of the ending and what the future might hold for the Barbers?
I mean, bleakly optimistic is only viable if we have 2 characters who are capable of living this way, which they kind of are. So I think it's chilling, but not hopeless. Again, I guess the glimmer of hope they have is that maybe there's a way to function, and certainly Andy's character has proved that you can live with things sublimated for quite some time. I think if Jacob hadn't done what he'd done, this family might have had very happy lives. And and if Jacob didn't do it, what this has done is brought things to the fore that ultimately they needed to reckon with, and now maybe they have. And I don't think of it in any way as a happier ending than the ending of the book. I just think it's a different kind of upsetting ending.
Yeah, and you mentioned, obviously we talked about the car crash and how that's sort of, Laurie's emotional breaking point. But I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of, where we see Andy's breaking point, which is when he's drunk, he's on vacation with his family, and he sort of, for the first time in his life, he tells the truth. He doesn't, sort of hold these lies in. Tell me a little bit about sort of what went into that scene where we see this man who has, sort of held everything inside for his entire life, finally, spill everything and tell the truth.
I mean, as Mark said very early, Andy's character is someone who has built his whole life on not telling the truth. Like who he is, where he comes from, his dad, what he's doing. So he's sort of created, which we also did with wardrobe and everything. We as you said, he has this like nice but very generic blue suits on the whole opening. And then goes into sort of like a gray, more relaxed tone, but it's sort of like he's sort of like fading away. His persona, which he sort of like created for himself, it's like he said, "This is who I want to be," and this is the lies he's been telling everybody. So it's someone who's constantly, he's so used to living that. It's sort of like second nature for him to not tell the truth about who he is. Because he's ashamed of his truth, he don't want it, So at this point is the one point where he's actually coming clean. He could have. It's kind of nice thing that if he had not said anything at night. Everything would be fine, but he would live with another truth, which he makes a point early on, which is to me as much interesting, is that he decides that the truth that Pat didn't confess, that he was actually killed and forced to confess, is something he will live with. He makes that character like, okay, I will live with that lie as well. I will keep this, meaning that my son might not be innocent, but I'm willing to live with that as well. I think that's a huge character choice. So he makes that character choice first. And if he's been willing to live with that lie completely, it would have a completely different ending. But he decides at one point, because he now feels like my son is killed again, I made a horrible mistake by actually, by not acting on this. My son has not done it again. He tells the truth, and Laurie is not able to both it's hard for her to forgive, but also it puts her back to exactly where she was before. That moment, that kitchen scene where she says, "What if you know in your heart that your son did this horrible thing?" So she's right back there, and so that's sort of like I love that we're playing with, because in movies you always say that a character who tells the truth always wins. It's like that's the whole thing. Living with a lie ends up horribly. This is kind of like the opposite. This is a character who actually tells the truth, and it goes horribly wrong. So it's interesting to play with, because our human nature is so much more complex. What we decide to live with and not live with, and it's I think that was interesting to explore, and it was also a very different scene between them. We always saw how do the meetings between Laurie and Andy become the different kind of scenes they have, two-handers. There's one other scene which we talked about, the kitchen scene where Laurie says she's so sure that he did it, which is very handheld. The lighting is very stark. It has a very specific mood. Then you have the scene where she's almost like a ghost, which is the end of the 8th episode, when they're talking like, when they're standing in the doorway, separated and trying to talk, which is shot differently. And then we have this scene, which is on the balcony, which is usually very romantic. It's like moonlight, there's waves. You're in Mexico, and he's confessing this dark truth. So we always wanted it to have all these scenes have a different flavor, have a different way they be shot, and have sort of like a very different atmosphere.
Yeah, and I'm curious, talking about the show overall as a whole, for each of you, what do you think was your biggest challenge on making this show overall?
Well, I know we probably have a similar answer in that neither of us had ever done anything that lasts 8 hours, right, from start to finish. And it makes writing a conventional screenplay look like the most economical use of your time. It's really about that engagement with the story on such an extended time frame. When I think about what kept me going as a writer and a producer, and it's not just the writing phase, but also the production phase and the editing phase. It's that you really have to care about what the show is about. And I think, luckily, this was sort of to circle back to where we started with this conversation. This was an idea that was able to speak to my love of genre, but also to my love of drama. And it was maintaining that focus on both fronts, right? Making it as dramatic as it could be, but also making it as riveting as it could be, and having that stretch out over the course of 8 hours, and I will say, it was some of the most pleasurable work I've ever done, because you can feel when it's working, and you do. And Morten and I would say this all the time to each other on set. You don't get to do this in movies as easily. It's much harder to pull this off in a movie. You're usually having someone from the studio looking over your shoulder and saying, we're at minute 20 in the story and you haven't done X, Y, and Z yet. And it's the blessing of this long format.
Absolutely. What about you, Morten? What do you think was your biggest challenge on this project overall?
The length is, of course, a huge challenge. You're going to shoot 8 hours of material. It's like 4 movies.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. It's thank God nobody going into this as a director shooting 8 episodes knows how hard it's going to be. Then he would never do it. done it just prepping, and you don't get more prep for time. It's because TV is not used to a lot of prep time, so you have little prep time, and you have to prep 8 hours because you're shooting every day. So it's that's daunting, and also we shot it as a movie because that's the only way we know how to shoot it. So we block shot it. We shot it completely out of order. So you have to sort of like not only have like the arch of a movie, the character arch of a movie or something like that. You have the character arch of like 8 hours. So we could during a day we could have scenes from like 3 or 4 episodes, and knowing exactly where everybody is, what's the rhythm, the feel, where the characters are, the emotions. All of that was hard because you had to have all this material in your head all the time. So that was daunting. But as Mark said, it's also insanely rewarding because, first of all, spending so much time with this cast. This is a very character-driven series. You have all these like really well-written dialogue scenes, character scenes. That was so fun to play and to shoot. So there's so much fun in doing this as the journey. Is also, it's also hard because you don't have an easy day.
Absolutely. So, I mean, for each of you, was there a particular day on set or a scene you shot that, when you think back on filming this, that just really sticks out in your mind?
I wonder if we're going to say the same scene.
Okay,
I'm guessing it might be. And it's the scene that Morten referenced earlier where Michelle is wearing this white sweater and it has a sort of otherworldly feel where it's really where you see their relationship end in many ways. And I remember the writing of it. I remember when I was done writing the scene, feeling really excited about its potential. And I remember sitting on set, and Chris and Michelle were just both so in the zone. And I just remember feeling like we're making exactly what we were trying to make. And so often when you're working on something, especially something this long, you get so hung up on the day-to-day work of it that you'll sort of blast through things that you wish you had more time to devote. And this was one where everything, I mean, Patty Podesta, our production designer, just killed it with the set, and Jonathan, our DP, Jonathan Freeman, just lit up everything. Everybody was at their absolute A game to make this scene a reality, and so it's one of the ones that I feel really fond about.
I love that scene too, and it's that's not like that, but this is a scene which we planned, and it's always nice to see the plan come together. Which, as Mark said, that's because we had ideas for it. If I should say things that there's a lot of, to me, it's like two things. A lot of the things I love it when smaller scenes, which you can't plan and have all the so many intentions planned for every scene. It's like it's humanly impossible. So there's some scenes you sort of like just have to find because it's like, okay, this is a shorter scene. We can find this, and I kind of like that on the set when we have smaller scenes that you just find on set and you see, oh, this becomes super important. This scene, even if it's like 3 shots, what do you have? It's now becoming a key scene because something happens. You find a way of shooting it, or there's an idea, or there's something the actors does that really makes it more important and bigger than what you thought. So there was a lot of those. It's like Michelle has all these smaller scenes. They break down in the bathroom, hugging your son afterwards, like all smaller things. But I love these things because there's not a lot of dialogue, if any, and they just become so valuable. And I also have to say, I loved shooting the court scene, which I dreaded. It was like my nightmare. It's like it's so I have nightmares about going in and shooting that, and because it's so much material. It's going to be so much action we needed, and the whole idea of approaching it is that you can't really move your camera so much, so we have to go movement through edit. And so we wanted like to constantly change point of view. Now one with this character, now one with this character, and all of that needs its separate setups. So we needed to shoot so much. We had 4 cameras, and it was like, we're never going to be able to get through this. And then just something happened during those days, because the actors were so on their A game. Like Terry Jones and Pablo Schreider were both incredible. They were so prepared, because they were kind of like driving those scenes. So I remember shooting those. Actually was such a joy, and I'm very happy with how shot episode 7, which is mostly everything taking place during the trial. So that was something I actually really cherished, because it was pretty crazy, but it actually came together very, very nice.
That's the best, where everything just clicks into place like that. Absolutely. Yeah,
it is. And you're expecting it to I mean, it's filmmaking is hard. It's everything you plan is as my film teacher said, like, filmmaking is problem solving. It's like, when you come to set, there's always something. There's something that you're supposed to work that doesn't work, and something we can't do, and then something's delayed and you don't have time, and you have to, so it's the beauty of things clicking. As Mark said, everybody brings their A game, and then when that happens, that's what we live for.
Absolutely.
These things are impossible to do well if everybody is not making the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things, as we've been doing press for this and we talk a lot about it now that we've finished it, one of the things that I am always most grateful for is that we all were trying to make the exact same show. And I think it's wherever it works, it's because everybody was really excited by this opportunity and looking to sort of not only bring their own A game, but make sure everyone else had the assist they need to do their best. It was really just a very rare, it's the definition of collaboration, in that way it was great.
That makes a huge difference, absolutely. So we have a couple audience questions, a couple fan questions. So to start, our first question is, how do you maintain the tension in the narrative arc over 8 episodes, as a writer and a director, when you're shooting non-chronologically? So how do you keep up that sense of tension when you're shooting out of order?
I think a lot of it is checking in with each other. Morten and I would always, every morning we'd talk about what that scene's role was in the overarching story. And I think it's about really being extra communicative with the actors as well. And just like everybody remembering, even though this scene might feel like it might want to be at this pitch, it's also buffeted by storytelling beats around it that if we take everything to that pitch, it's going to screw up the rhythm. So it's really about thinking of its pinpoint on the map in a larger way. Morten could probably speak to the
No, it's all comes down to planning. Actually, it sounds kind of boring, but it's kind of it. It needs to be the writing and the and you need to keep track of it as like shooting a thriller is very different than kind of like a drama. Drama can evolve in front of you much more. A thriller, you need to have planned what is the information I'm going to hold back, what is the information I'm going to give, who is experiencing this, who is seeing this, whose eyes are we telling the story through, and what camera angles, how do we want to shoot this to create tension, what's the rhythm of it. You're doing all these things to actually, and sometimes you want to sort of like show that something is wrong. Let's say you can have a very normal discussion between man and wife, but the camera just moves towards them in a very slow, airy way, and maybe just ignores them and looks at something else. I mean, there's ways of shooting it that you feel something is off, something is happening. So you have to sort of like know where those points are throughout the whole story. You can't just come up with it there on the set. This is things you really have to plan. So that's one thing. And then there will always be something you're not really sure if you need or not. Like one thing, because as Mark said, we constantly talk. Like, is this enough? Did we do it enough there? Do we need more in this scene? Do we need we constantly wanted to shape it. One thing we did was that at school, when in the first episode, when Jacob is calling his dad, just to there's lockdown, and he calls his dad, and he's standing there looking at the dead boy and talking to his son. We actually shot that there's blood on Jacob's sleeve. So he's like rubbing, he sees that there's blood there and he's rubbing it off. That, ooh, that could be, maybe that's cool. Like he's we already planted something that Jacob has been at the dead body. So that was like a thriller beat that to create tension, and he's hiding it from these other students. So we shot it. It was not in the original script, but then we came up with it during 1 hour talk. Like, okay, let's have it to see if we need it. And then we needed it. We didn't need it. It was not the tension was good enough, and not knowing, and we didn't want it to foreshadow it. So we had several of those where we tried something and just had it in the back pocket in case we needed it.
But the scary thing is when you're trying to be very sort of cognizant of how many days you have to shoot, you start to whittle out things that you think you don't need. And that's also scary, is when you say, there's this tiny little scene, maybe we don't need it, let's just cut it from the schedule. And you realize, well, it was written in there for a reason, and have we lost the memory of why we thought we needed it? And I mean, I couldn't have had a better partner in Morten, because like when I would say, all right, I think we can cut it, Morten would be the one to say, make sure you feel that way. Or if Morten, I think we can cut it, I would say, here's why we did it, you know. And I think if both of us were quicker to sort of just say, oh, this is exhausting us, yeah, sure, we'll cut whatever, we would have felt it in the editing room. And we always.
And there was a lot of things that, you know, nobody knew the story as much as me and Mark. Like, we knew all the differences. And when you're shooting so much, it's hard for people. So we were running a little bit behind at the end. And of course, you get all these suggestions, like from the studio, like, we don't think this is necessary. We don't think this is necessary, because, you know, it's smaller scenes and they want to cut it out. And it's a lot of fighting there. Then we decided that, no, we just have to take them out of the schedule, and then we'll shoot it anyway. So we just had a lot of stuff, like, we know that they're going to be happy with it. We know that if we don't shoot, like Laurie lying in bed and can't sleep, so it's like, no, it's not important. We don't need to know. They're telling her later on that the information that she didn't sleep at night is coming later. We don't need that, but you need it. You need to see her lying there, not because you need to feel it. It's like a lot of studios don't really see the difference between understanding something and really feeling it. So they take away this small moment that actually makes you feel it as an audience. So we had to sort of like fight it, and then we just shot it. Like, we were kind of like a two-headed troll. That was kind of really, me and Mark, like it's really hard to deal with us, because we were like, this is how we're doing it. We're doing it anyway. Because we know, and later on, whatever, it's like, we have the most boring deleted scenes, because there literally are almost no deleted scenes. Yeah, I think there's like one, maybe, like that's like the complete scene, that's not just like a half scene or whatever. So I like to think that, looking back now, we were right. We did in sort of like holding the line and saying, like, nope, we're just going to shoot it.
Vindication in the end. In the end, it was ultimately.
I would agree as well.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, hey, thank you guys again for chatting with me. This has been so much fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Devan Coggan from Entertainment Weekly, and you can stream Defending Jacob now on Apple TV+.